from a military perspective, did you see the New York Times reported that the
Mm,
Pentagon warned Trump about Iran's improving ability to track US jets with Russian Chinese help, and that paused
mhm.
further strikes? That was from before, and since then, Iran's capabilities in terms of the air defense capabilities have improved because of Russian and Chinese support. So from a military perspective as well, along with what we talked about earlier, Iran has already restarted drone production during the ceasefire. Some estimates say
Right.
full drone capability would be restored in 6 months. And we know about the missiles and missile launchers. 70 to
Mhm.
90% of them are still intact. All of this together just makes him, as we said before, a military option almost not feasible anymore.
Yeah. And I just want to call attention to that remanufacturing things. If any of you, when I lived in Iraq, I lived in Basra, and if you were to drive to Baghdad, there's a section of highway. I think it's north of El Amara, and it goes up into southern Baghdad. And there's all these truck workshops, right? Just like 1,000 of them, and they can rip apart anything. They were tearing apart old tanks, getting batteries, using treads to melt down. Iran has this capability. You've all seen these garages where there's 100 workers and they can take apart a car and they can put it back together again, right? The wiring will suck, but everything will work, will look good, right? A crashed Maserati can be restored. Iran's going to do that to every damn destroyed vehicle that's out there, even if it's just the wheel hubs to those ballistic missile launchers for these large scale ballistic missile launchers. That's a piece of maintenance. They don't, that's a piece of material they can fix and send out to garages. A hydraulic strut to actually lift the launcher, maybe even the launcher sections. We could have destroyed those things. They're probably going to recover 30% of the material, components to remanufacture and build new launchers. And all you need for a launcher is a heavy duty truck frame. And they were building their own frames. So over the next year, we're going to be looking down on satellite, and we shouldn't be looking for giant warehouses anymore. Start looking in these truck manufacturing districts. That's what I would recommend to my, geospatial intelligence guys. And we're going to see, first, where is all the scrap being taken? Second, what's being disassembled? And if we count, you can count the frames, right? Even though we made a lot of frames vaporware. That's scrap, and scrap is valuable. The rear view mirrors were custom made on those things. So we might even be able to get a more accurate count of the launchers if the IRGC creates these
Mm.
vehicle scrap warehouses. And once that's done, they'll start remanufacturing ballistic missile launchers, but not in the way that we thought. Warehouses, dedicated facilities. It'll be like on the Afghan Baluch border, way in the southeast, so that U.S. they get hours of warning for these bombings. But with regards to that report about Chinese and Russian capability, 99% of the time in a shooting war, the best information that you can get that will help you become more combat effective, and I'm sure you're going to ask Colonel Aguilar about this, right? Is not taking the guy and giving him the exact location of the target. Sometimes it's just zeroing your weapon. Okay. Zeroing your weapon, for those of you who aren't in the military, is where you make the changes so the bullet at 100 meters hits where your optics say they hit, right? So that they are zeroed, and then you're perfect. So at 100 meters, you know where you aim that rifle, that's where it's going to go. And in war and intelligence, re-zeroing would be, hey, we watched how you tried to engage these U.S. aircraft. You were shooting outside the engagement envelope, or you were wasting missiles for effect. Maybe you should bring up more anti-aircraft guns and surround that are mobile on the backs of trucks. Maybe
They were
you
also
should.
they were also tracking the paths of the fighter jets as well. I just remembered from the report and sharing that
Then
data.
there's then there is historical flight data. That's where I was getting to next. Historical flight data, we have a tendency as Americans that to go through corridors where we know there is little risk. And I think were very happy that unlike the Iraqis during Desert Storm and some of these other operations like Southern Watch, they weren't moving these vehicles around to fill those corridors. But in the modern AI world, you can get a graphic that shows your trail from where radar was seen or where a visual observer saw you or somebody with a mobile phone saw you. And if you track that every day for 15,000 missions, you are going to get the preferred flight corridors and you're going to see the gaps in where your guns are and where your missiles are. And then what you can do is what we call a SAMbush, right? A surface to air missile ambush. You can bring up a system that can sit on the top of a mountain that might look at that corridor. And then you don't do anything for the first 2 or 3 days of airstrikes, right? You let them feel
Yeah.
like, hey, those corridors are pretty safe. And then boom, an F-15 gets shot out of the sky.
That's what we talked about
So,
when the F-15 was shot.
yes,
I remember.
ambushes. So, yeah, that's just, you know what? The Iranians could probably do that with AI themselves. But correlating that, the best in the best thing that the Iranians could have gotten was advice to say, hey, man, this is how we shoot these drones in Ukraine. Hey, man, this is where the Americans are flying in and just dropping shitloads of bombs on you.
Yeah.
Why don't you think about a SAMbush over here? Doesn't cost them anything.
Another report that came in today I want to get your thoughts on is two things related to Israel. Number one
Mhm.
is let's talk about the Ahmadinejad story, the former president of Iran. Have you seen that one?
Ah,
According to the New York
yeah.
Times, that Israel, he was meant to be, even they coordinated with him for him to replace the president or the supreme leader in a new regime, and they bombed his house to get rid of the security that were kind of
The
not that keeping
IRGC
him keep.
security.
Yeah, exactly. They were keeping him under house arrest. So the goal was to get rid of them for him to get out of the house, and then he becomes the leader somehow, and somehow he was injured in that strike. Sounds like
I'm
BS
not
to me. I don't
sure.
know.
I'm not sure. First off, do they know who Ahmadinejad is? This
Exactly. He
guy
wanted to
was
wipe
a
out Israel.
hard liner. You know,
Yeah.
I talked to you about this maybe 2 weeks ago. The Bollywood, Iraniwood, Turkish version of the good guy is the guy in the blazer who wears a shirt with no tie in Middle Eastern movies, right?
Mm.
After all the old Egyptian movies from the 70s, it became a meme that the guy without the tie was the cool guy, the good guy. Bad guys wear ties in Turkish television, Lebanese television, all of these things. Ahmadinejad was one of the first guys I remember who came out with the blazer and the collar and the neatly cropped face. That belied the fact that he was a hardcore hardliner. And I mean, this is the guy who when JCPOA was torn up, he was like, enrich uranium for everybody, right? This guy was not he was not a moderate character. But don't
Yeah.
forget, they are using the Venezuela model. They
Yeah.
think that literally every person can be purchased. Everybody, this guy may have been on the outs. I don't think that he was under house arrest. I didn't recall that. In fact, I
Mm.
recall when that strike happened, it was initially reported he was killed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
I
remember.
think
I
I might
remember.
even
Yeah.
have a Substack where I had it that he was
And he
killed.
hasn't been seen since, by the way.
Hasn't been seen since. Yeah, because he's probably sitting by him and freaking, Mujtaba al Khamenei are
Mushtaba.
probably smoking shisha and sitting about thinking up clever things that they're going to do to Trump. But he looks, when you look at Ahmadinejad, he looks like a guy you can talk to, a used car salesman, sure, but always the white shirt, the blazer. And I'm going to tell you, quite honestly, this is cultural intelligence. White people in America in government can be quite racist. And they can look at that and say, he's not wearing the IRGC Rev Guard green. He's not wearing, he's not a mullah. He doesn't have these things. He's a guy we can talk to because he wears a blazer. So does everyone in Turkey. I mean, there are some things you've got to get into their heads. And he has a proven record of Bag America, right? Death to America.
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
guy is not a moderate. So whoever, but you know what, Mario? I've been through so many stupid operations where I might have mentioned this a couple of times, where my knowledge of cultural intelligence, Islamic history, and things, where I was like, whoa, where did you come up with that crazy ass idea? And they were like, Muslims turn their backs on us at 6 in the morning when they have to pray. Let's do an airstrike at 6 in the morning. That actually happened. And I said, no, when you're on Rabat, when you're actually in your fighting position, you're supposed to keep your face to the enemy. And they were like, oh, really? you know, People are victims of their own ignorance and lack of cultural intelligence. And I think this story may have been that they increased his security because they valued him, not that he was a captive of the
Yeah.
mullahs. And guess what? I swear to God, we're going to find out he's been smoking shisha, playing tawala all day, backgammon with Ahmadinejad, with Mujtaba al-Khamenei next to
Mustafa.
his bed at the hospital, and we're going to find out that he's going to be the new president or something, and he's going to be just as hardline as before.